Hi, painting class. I wanted to move forward with the next stage. Once you have your picture printed, gridded, and as accurately transferred as possible, we're going to have two other steps. And these are going to be like a washy, very pale, watery paint consistency. We don't want to waste paint while we get to know the subject. So we want to build up really slowly. You're not going to need much paint at all, like hardly at all. We're not using white, we're not using gray. The only thing we're using is a small pile of black. So as always, you want to mix a little pile with your palette knife really well, get it to a good consistency. But then we're going to use more water. Not so much watery on the palette paper, but just dipping the brush and using the paint in different consistencies. I have a variety of brushes here because even though I'm not putting a lot of paint on here, I mean, I know you guys don't have this many, but they're all really good brushes. So I'll be able to get some nice shapes with the flat brushes and the round. I wanted to show you how small these can get. These are round brushes with a variety of different, when you see color on there, it's just a stain. Whatever paint you use first on a brush is going to stain it, especially if it's a really wild color like the one I used on that one. So you can see how tiny these get. Those are all round brushes. These will be good when you have itty bitty little marks. It's pretty rare though that you use round brushes. In my case, I might need a few just for some of these subtle areas on here. But for the most part, I'm going to be using flat brushes. And we talked a little bit about that before. These are great for shapes. I tried to get you a variety of brushes without them being ridiculously overpriced. But I have this larger brush, then I have a medium, then I have a little one smaller. And you can see they get really narrow to the point where they almost look like a round brush, but they're not. They're little tiny flat brushes. I can show you this one. Yes, anyway, yeah, right there on the blue left. Anyway, so I'm going to try to use a variety. Ideally, I'm going to start exploring my brushes, what they can do, and how I might want to use them in my painting. I'm also going to start analyzing where the values may be and where the values are lighter or darker. But instead of using white, I'm going to use different piles of black that are going to be like a gray over here. So I'm going to make a medium gray, a lighter gray, a darker gray, all from using water. So it's a very watery layer, and I'm going to start by exploring that. I'm going to mix my paint a little better. I've been having trouble with the consistency of my black paint. Occasionally that will happen. Various tubes can come through a little weird. We had one year where all the ultramarine blues were gummy and had to be sent back. But I'll do my best to start applying those darks from observation. The other thing I want to start looking at is how things move vertically, Do they go down? Do they go up? As I start to block this in, and again, you'll see a little bit of a texture on my brush because I'm having this issue. But if I cover up some of the painting, some of the drawing, that's okay. I'm just starting to get a sense of how this moves down. And there's a little light there, little dot right there. And I'm just starting to examine this. It's very watery. Don't want to commit to a lot of paint. I'm starting to take a look at the structure of the shapes as opposed to the line around it. So I'm going to come over here And just start blocking in. There's a little ledge right there. So it's the beginning of learning your object. When you first pick it, you don't know about all these little details. I knew about the swirlies in here. There's like a little texture in there. So I am aware of that, but I hadn't noticed this ridge. So it's like I'm just taking a mental note, and even though it's a flat brush, I'm just going to put it in there while I see it. Sometimes when you have a realization, you got to jump on it and make it happen. In other words, make a mental note to yourself. And then this comes this way. Okay, I see there's a little ridge there I hadn't seen. And I'm just starting to practice a little bit of my hard edge painting for later, and this will build a very gentle light layer. And because of the consistency of my particular paint, it's going to be better when I add a little bit of white to it. It'll just allow the better paint of the white to influence my unfortunate black, or I'm just going to have to get a different tube. But basically, I can use this as an opportunity because it's very diluted anyway, and it'll act as the water too. So again, I'm just creating that little edge there by painting around it, like we talked about lines being better created when they're painted around. I know it's not really there yet, but after when I come back with paint and I put white there, or light gray, I'll do the same thing. So I'm just kind of practicing how I'm going to later make two shapes of flat brush across. So I'm kind of like, okay, there's a swirly thing, there's a swirly kind of a thing, I don't know what that is, but it's decorative or something in there. And I can get a sense of how it moves. And if I feel like a movement is in the wrong direction, I can go back and kind of gently watery put it in there. Now I used more paint than water there because that was pretty dark. But I can also add a little water here if I feel like I used too much paint. And then I'm noticing there's a little swirl and then a little dot there too, similar to there. And I'm making a mental note to myself that when I come back and start using more paint, I'm not going to put a white dot there, but I'll put a patch of white and then paint around it. And I'm starting to see, okay, this goes like this goes like that. Now the other areas are going to be lighter because they just are on the picture. At some point you're going to get rid of your grid. It's not going to be relevant. Now this one is along this edge, so I'm going to paint it as if it's along the side, and I'm using more water. The texture, even though mine is a little weird here, it doesn't matter. This is an underpainting. It's a classic technique where the artist starts to train their eye to see what's really there. You can see the swooshes here, so I'm going to go swooshes. And I'm just making all kinds of mental notes to myself. I'm like, okay, this is a blurry edge. This is an opportunity to blend, as we did on the value scale. Whereas there's other opportunities for hard edge, which is why I picked this, which is all of them on that list of pictures, that page of pictures. They all have opportunities for both. So I'm actually adding more information from rendering that I might have missed as well, more details. If you lose your drawing, you can get it back by redrawing it with paint. It's a little dark, I add more water. So it's actually an exercise in re-emphasizing your rendering skills. I'm just going to blob it as if it were a different medium just because it was too dark. And I'm using the same brush just because it's all kind of similar in size here. But when I get into these little areas, I might want to switch to a smaller brush, even in an underpainting, just to get a sense of the kind of brush I might use later in this. And because it's watered down on my brush and watered down on the palette, even though it looks dark, I'm just adding just a little bit less water. It's going to allow me to not have to stop as often and wash my brush because it's so diluted over there and on the brush, but you still want to take breaks and have different watery piles to grab from. Try to explore different brushes here. It's easy, like I was just doing, to just get caught up in one brush. And then you pick up another one and it's hard because then you're caught up in that brush. But try to use, some different sizes and shapes. Start to see what they do. There's a little line in here. I'm just going to use the side of a flat brush. What is cool about these boards is you can lean your hand on it and you can work flat, which is weird for me because it's supposed to work vertical when you paint. But that's really to see accuracy too and to see the work that you've done. So basically, after you do a good 45 minutes or so of painting, always take a break, stand back, prop it up, take a look. Because a lot of times you get so caught up close like this that it falls out of place. Everything gets moved around, especially once you get past the grid. And when that happens, you want to really stand up, use the length of your brush, and put the picture right next to the image, the painting next to the image, so that you can make corrections by standing back. That's the point of an easel, is to sit far away and to be able to back up all the way. The best thing you could do is go outside, prop it up, and walk as far away as you can. Get as much distance as you can from your picture at all times. Because if you don't, you won't be able to catch these things that happen. And they happen. You might work on something for an hour and a half and find out it's off. And then you've just wasted that time. It's not a waste of time, but it's unfortunate. And you can't lie. Like if you do a portrait as an artist and you spend 5 months on it, whatever, and you're not careful to look at the proportions and measure enough, and then you go to hang it up on the wall, and one eyeball is lower than the other. Well, that sucks. So what do? Well, if you're not a real artist, you try to pass it off. You try to hope no one notices. And you try to be able to live with yourself for getting away with it. But an artist goes straight back to the drawing board, starts completely over. Even if you have to erase the whole darn thing every time. If it's off, it's off. And the problem is sometimes when you correct one area, it exposes another flaw in another area. And the next thing you know, you have to start over, basically. Structure is everything. See, I'm noticing this dark edge now. It's just like the little things. It's like your own little personal journey of exploration and realization of what's on here. What is it? There's a blending opportunity here. That'll be fun later with these little flat brushes. This edge is quite dark. I'm starting to examine the value relationships, and the value helps with accuracy. People think that darks and lights are just for decoration or volume or whatever, but value is a super important tool in measuring. It's what we call mass gesture. In a drawing class, you might start out with line just because generally art classes start out with line because humans are most comfortable with that. It's something we see all the time, and it's something people can control visually because it's like permanent outline. It's like manageable to people. But really, that's what you want to get away from in drawing and painting, is you want to get away from the edge and look at the surface and the planes of the surface and the values of the surface. And so by using value in shapes, which is the flat brush deal, and let's say charcoal, big chunk of charcoal, or filling a big area with pencil, or a big swatch of ink, ink wash, all of these things allow you to draw using mass gesture, which is the next step after line. Gestures everything in drawing, especially when you're working from direct observation. Ideally, in a painting class, the whole room, we'd all be around a subject. The whole group would be on easels facing usually a still life. If it were a figure painting class, it would be a model. But for these sorts of things, beginning drawing is usually a still life, not a picture, not a grid, not a piece of paper. But we're so limited with space, not only in the room, but especially now, we can't all be looking at the same subject and comparing and really sitting in chairs in permanent spots so that we get the same view. A lot of times in an art class, the entire semester is working on the same still life, either the same position or moving around it in various vantages, which makes it a completely different thing. But we're not having to deal with that because we're working from imagery, because that's what's manageable, and you're still going to get the same lessons from it. And observation is everything. And so these value shapes allow you to create more accuracy from observation because you're matching the value and then you're learning about the shapes. And you can see how bizarrely interesting that corner is. Now, if all the mark making you did before is distracting, just print it again. And each time you print it, ideally you'd print a better copy. And usually people would end up going to Walmart or Office Depot and print a really nice one on photo paper. But they started doing this thing where you have to do $5 minimum to print. So you can either buy photo paper and take your own printer and try to get a nice copy, or if you know someone that has a great printer, ask them to mail you one through the regular mail if you're not leaving the house. And if you are leaving the house, you can email it to yourself at at Office Depot. That's what I do. I did get a printer finally, but if I want a really good copy, it's only 50 cents, but you ask them to do it on printer paper. Anyway, I digress. Point is, if it gets messy, just replace. Now I'm going to switch back to a little bigger brush. So you see, I'm kind of starting to get a little stuff. I'm started getting a little bit excited because I'm using this watered down value to start placing and seeing stuff I hadn't before and shapes I didn't even see to draw. And even within this shape, there's a little value. And the most important part about learning to paint or draw is training your eye to let go and start to notice these subtleties that are really profound players in this image. Like right now, this is an example, and you may think it's totally weird and not see it at this point. And maybe I'm even sitting too far away, but as a trained artist my whole life, I'm looking at this blob here. And sometimes you'll go, oh, it looks like a fish, or it looks like this, or it looks like that. Sometimes I can go, okay, there's a little heart laying on its side. There's like a little head. It's almost like a body. But to me, I'm looking more at the width of shapes and the value. Like this is a nice light gray, but there's 3 blots. It almost looks like water spots, like slightly lighter. And then there's this slip of a light gray. And then there's this even lighter gray that looks like a triangle with a stick and then like a stick. Now, if I'm painting that, I can't just blob it in. I have to make sure I put it in the right place. So I might go back, if I hadn't drawn it in, and redraw it with pencil over here. But I don't want to lose this. And what's cool is when I do have gray and white out, I can clean this up later. But this is a mental note to myself. And if I can match the value as best I can, I'm going to use a smaller brush. I'm switching from brush to brush, which is a great thing to get used to. I demonstrated in the blending that you should always have 3 brushes in your hand at all time. In this case 2, because I'm not using other values except water, so that works. I have 2 only because I'm doing medium and small. But in general, you want to have light, medium, and dark in your hand at all time. So you can alternate between sizes and values. It's tricky when you have not too many brushes, because ideally you'd have like 3 of the same size brushes with 3 different values. But see, with acrylic, it dries so fast anyway, it's kind of good that you don't, because it's hard to keep track of 3 of each size of each value. So 3 is a good rule of thumb. If they're not exactly the right size, that's cool. Oh, look at this. This is super cool. I just saw. Of course, there's this whole swirly thing here, but right here, it's a lighter gray than the background. Obviously is a lighter, but it's similar to value to that one, but it's not as light as this. So I'm gonna, and then you know what? It's on a plane, because this is linear perspective. Some of you picked round elliptical glass. I picked, or metal, I picked cubes. So I'm going to start to move in the direction of the cube, which is up and down. I don't like that value, it's too dark. So you kind of just keep adding water and just get, oh, and always have a bounty towel or some kind of towel that's absorbent. Some people just have a towel and that's your towel for the semester, but I don't like this. This is a random weird thing where you can wipe stuff off because you're not using a lot of paint yet. Oh, that works pretty well. I'm liking that. So I'm going to go up and down because this jar votive thing goes up and down. You always want to paint in the direction that the object is moving. And this is a great way to start exploring that direction. Up and down, up and down, up and down. And then down here, it's darker. So I'm switching to my little one again, and I'm going to capture this before I forget. A lot of it is a dialogue with yourself, like, if I don't put it there now, what if I forget later? So I'm just going to make sure I get it in. I really like that swirly thing. I'm going to just do that, just because. So I can go up and down. And the reason I'm doing this is that that's how the thing moves. You can see it's starting to flatten itself. I can also do it here. Well, it's too dry. But anyway, it was fun while it lasted. This over here goes, oh, this is darker here. The other thing a lot of people do is they get stuck in an area. If you feel like you've been working on something too long in one area, do something else, at least at this stage. Until you have the entire structure blocked in, there's just no point in getting caught up. So after this, you want to look at this as a whole, and then the next step is get the entire board covered. We want to cover the entire board before we keep going. And we don't want any texture from the board. I'm not sure exactly how textured the board may be compared to a usual canvas. I just found a piece of wood in the garage. So my consistency is, I'm going to have to use a little more paint than you are. It doesn't stick on there as well. But problem with that is you may see little dots. And so you just need more paint. We want coverage. Our goal is to get rid of any texture of the board, of the canvas, any of that stuff. So I don't want to get too crazy in here. I want to keep moving around. I want to block it in so I can see the hole, because then I'm going to put it up on the wall and look and see if my values are starting to match in some way. So I'm going to switch to this brush. I'm going to go up and down here because side to side is just making it look too flat. When in doubt, up and down, up and down, up and down. People go boom, boom, boom. Remember, up and down is really important. Side to side is sort of a given. And crisscross is great in the background, or if something has no plane to it, like we did on the warm-up. Sometimes you do crisscross in these areas, but you also want to keep the direction. So when I start using more paint, I may do itty bitty crisscross, smooth, 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 but I also don't want to create the feeling of air so it doesn't have structure. This whole area will be a great way to blend slowly in. This would be a great crisscross with still the feeling of up and down. Now, it's hard to see on here, but the background here is white and this is light gray. So I would use, in this case, I'd grab a big brush and just swoosh in a very light gray. I don't have a strong negative space on here. I was worried about this image because it doesn't have a horizon line, but it has a little shadow that I'm going to play around with. And sometimes at the very end, we take a little artistic license, sometimes even a glaze. There's just things, a glaze of color. It all depends on your individual painting and what it calls for. It's literally kind of a group decision looking at a piece. If there's something unique you can do at the end, and that's a design issue, like adding the horizon line. You know, I might decide to do a little value shift, very subtle, from super light gray to white. I don't know. That's later. Right now, I'll put a little bit of this. Oh, it's too dark. But I want to put a little of this. So, God, this paint, man, this is, I'm going to have to do something about that. This is too dark, but I can kind of start to see a little bit of that kind of halo thing. And then there's a thing here, here, here. And of course, see how I'm going side to side? Now that is side to side. That works because this is a flat table. If something goes up this way and across that way and flat on the table, crisscross in the back, that makes sense. If you have an elliptical shape, you're going to go up and down, circle, etc. And that is the next step. I'll do more here, but the next step after this diluted shapes of value is going to be cross contour lines. And you can't do it until this is completely dry, and you're going to use just white. So it's like you're switching. This is all diluted black paint with flat brushes. After it dries, you're going to come back with round brushes with diluted white paint to do the cross contour lines, which helps you learn the way things move structurally, so that when you do start applying more paint, you know what direction to apply it. And you also now have learned a couple things about your subject, stuff you didn't see before, and that will keep happening and happening as you go. And hopefully you just really get into it. But something like this, once I finish this, a little more of this is too dark. I can always add a little more water. But if it gets a little too dark, it just means you didn't add enough water. And you can either add more or take a paper towel. I'm just having a textural thing. So hopefully this still made sense. This is a little too dark there. But you get the idea. But you see how watery it is. The main thing is we don't want to create thick texture. If you get too clunky with the paint without diluting it at this level, you're going to end up with a really difficult, chunky texture that's hard to get off. See, I'm kind of compensating here by switching tools, but that's okay. I'm still like learning about this thing. All right, next step will be cross contour lines, and then we'll start to really get into it. Don't forget, every stage you have to take a picture, even several, because in the post you have to put the original picture, the gridded picture, the line drawing grid on the board, and the wash, and the cross contour, and then a comment about it. So it's 7 things So if you haven't documented the scale and all that stuff, that's on there too, the scale. My scale wasn't on here. I did it on a piece of cardboard. But yours will be on here. So you can either leave it on here while you're doing this, or if it's distracting to you, just put some diluted white over it. You can turn it sideways, whatever you need to do to forget about it, and paint over it. So you want to take a picture of the scale first, then draw the drawing, take a picture of the drawing, then do this washy black, take a picture of that, then do the lines of a washy round brush across contour, and your original picture, and your gridded. Sounds like a lot, but just remember to keep photographing. And then I wish I could, anyway, I want to put it up on the wall so you can see. Well, you can see because you're seeing it better than I am. You're seeing it the way it should be seen, far away and vertical. So in a way, it's perfect. So you got a better idea about what I just did than I do. Anyway, so that's the process, and see you soon.